Just sum up for us again the one myth and two truths that in your mind encapsulates HR transformation.
Right, so HR is a team game, it's a football game. Your operations, your technology is basically your defense. It doesn't win you any games, it protects you. And the thing is that once that has been set up, that is run, you play, your ball gets lesser in your defense, but you're playing in the forward upfront field of the field itself, which is the midfield and the defense.
Alvin Goh, welcome this morning to the Rolling Stories podcast. I really appreciate you making the time to be here. Do you want to just give us a quick rundown or a flyover of your career in the past decade or two?
All right, so I currently hold the Global Head of HR Transformation in WS Audiology. So I don't come from a very typical HR background. So I would say that I wouldn't say I stumbled into it, I kind of saw the opportunity. So I spent about 6-ish years in Accenture. I started out my career as a consultant. My first job was actually a developer in Accenture. I was coding, coding SAP ABAP applications. And that was a SAP HR application in that sense. And then I've always been in the HR technology space. And then that's where I saw that the boom HR technology coming in, with success factors and stuff coming on board and stuff. So that's how I started to move, through technology into the area of HR, and then now fully blown into the role of HR itself. So that's a little bit of myself.
And so, look, the topic of today's conversation is HR transformation. And so we'll get a little bit more into your role in a moment. But as you and I were talking about before we got on, I think HR transformation, hasn't it just been around for a long time? And it means, I think, many different things to many different people. And as you probably have, Alvin, I've read a lot of papers which have a lot of jargon in there and very, I guess the fundamental ideas are good, but there's a lot of flowery stuff around it. And so I wondered if we could kick the conversation off with maybe just, your particular view of what HR transformation means, or it means to you, and what you've experienced.
For me, it's about one myth and two truths in there. And how I see HR transformation or HR as a thing or as a function is the how I would like always to describe it as a football game, or a football team, how this is being set up itself. So if I may, let me start off with the first one, which is the myth. Typically, people like to associate HR transformation with technology transformation. Right, this is where I wanted to bring in the value of the game, the football game. Just imagine it as a defense, the midfield, and the attack. The technology space is basically your defense, the operational space where HR is very comfortable operating in, right? The admin work, the papers, the process, the different things that is out there. The role of technology is the defense of the football game. And when you think about it, is the defense going to win you any game or going to score you any goals? Probably not. What it does is that it prevents the opponent from scoring goals. So what are the true values of what HR technology brings? There are multiple facets. You can talk about an experience. There's a lot of people are talking about it. You talk about data. You can also talk about then the automation that is actually coming in through technology. And I just want to focus a little bit on the piece on data, because I think that is also the portion where it is the least spoken about on literature. And this is where I would like to also then talk a little bit about the amortization of data. All right, so what do we mean by amortization of data itself? Is basically how do we use data to provide values, to the business.
So back to your football analogy then, defense, midfield, attack. You're positioning technology as a must-have, absolutely. but more like getting that right means you've got a good defense. And while you won't lose the game, you might not necessarily win the game, right? So okay, so that platform, the defense. Let's assume in our HR transformation journey, the defense is now set up. What's next in your opinion?
Well, then, with any typical football team, then it's the midfield and the attack. And I think, I'm not going to say which is which, but for me, it's then two elements or two facets of how that's going to be. One, in terms of how HR sees ourselves, the mirror view. I think many of the time that is important. And I think the other one is actually how the business see HR. I think that is also another concept on that. So let me start with how HR sees ourselves. We need to have a change in terms of the mindset. All right, I spoke to a lot of people in HR. They see themselves as operational. They see themselves as a corporate function. But if we need to have a change in the mindset, that needs to be thrown out of the window. So two provoking comments here in terms of how HR should see ourselves. I think the first question that we need to ask ourselves is, are we delivering the outcome or are we delivering the experience? And the second one is really then, how are we marketing ourselves for all the work that we have actually done?
Sure. Very interesting point there. I mean, I would say a fair number of the HR directors I've ever worked with and worked for, some of the most successful were not actually a HR by background. That maybe is a good segue to your second myth and the third point in transformation, which is how the business views HR. And you could argue that if you see a HR function with some career HR people, you do get that, what I've seen, that sort of oil and water. They just don't mix, right? Because the business assumes that HR don't understand the business, and HR just assume that the business don't understand HR, and the two don't go together. So on that third point, then, how the business views HR, what's some of your thinking? What's some of your experiences there?
Well, I think one common myth and one common phrase that I've always been hearing, and you'll probably hear it multiple times as well, which is HR needs to have a seat on the table, right? Common phrase. Yes. For me, it goes back to one of the books that I read recently. I think it's called Empowering HR. It's a very new book that came out in 2021. And I like this particular phrase in the book itself, where it basically tells us HR has a seat on the table, right? HR is the business function, where people-related topics are domains that we operate in, right? HR is a business function. We don't need to tell the business that we need to have a seat on the table. We are part of the business. So this is the reality, this is the fact, and this is basically the realm that we need to work in, right? And in HR, we are to some extent blessed, or not so fortunate as well, that there are multiple business problems that we need to manage. And if you switch things around, and I'll just have two examples here. One is about talent risk, right? Talent risk is a business risk. Without people, we cannot operate. Everybody is snatching people. We have in Singapore a highly competitive talent landscape, where you have the big Chinese tech companies like Tencent, TikTok coming into Singapore, setting up HQs. You have the tech giants like Dyson, like Apple, like Google in Singapore as well. So there is this whole macro situation. And when we look at talent risk, it's no longer going to be analysis of how much attrition we're going to have, how much inflow we're going to have, and how much recruitment we're going to have. This is one way of looking at it. But if I just use the same example and I basically package it differently, managing talent risk is a business risk. And we basically need to do a SWOT analysis around it, right? SWOT analysis is something that is out there in marketing. I remember studying in the university on a course on marketing, SWOT analysis. It's about strengths and weaknesses about the organization. What are kind of the strengths that we have? What are the weaknesses that we have? Strengths can be your market positioning. It could be your operations, your technology you're operating in. Weakness could be your pay structure. So you need to be able to do that kind of analysis, SWOT analysis. What are opportunities and what are the threats? Threats could be external. So many of times when we look at talent risks, we need to first identify, if there are no people poaching our guys in-house, then there is less threat. Then it's about going out there, picking up different things. So as I said, classic HR examples, classic HR work, but if you repackage it, re-look at it from different angle, think from a business standpoint, this is then about managing the risk.
What therefore has been on your agenda, or what is coming up on your agenda, this past year and the coming year? Now, I know COVID is a big part of that, and you've just given a couple of examples of planning around COVID. But from a sort of more pure sort of HR point of view, what's been happening in your transformation role this past year and coming up?
Well, we are probably done with the first phase of the transformation. So right now, the myth is gone, right? If I use back to the example that I had, the myth is gone. So now it's about transforming ourselves, building up HR as a credible function. We are not there yet. We'll probably get a few years. And at the same time, we are also then building the culture of the organization, right? This is an important piece itself. For us, this is going to be the key differentiator. Speaking from the chairman, speaking from the CEO, they are all very, very passionate about culture, because to them, without a good culture, the company will never be the number one. And we have very strong and ambitious target of being the number one in the market. And culture is going to be the one that we're going to bring us forward, because that is where the whole team is going to move as one big machinery and unit and move forward, rather than multiple segments of people going left and right and stuff. So this is where the current focus is and will be in the next couple of years itself.
Okay. So if we had to sum up then, as we said, regarding HR transformation, as you said, as a football team, defense, midfield, and attack. Just sum up for us again the one myth and two truths that in your mind encapsulates HR transformation.
Well, so you've got to summarize it in a metaphorical manner, right? So HR is a team game, it's a football game. Your operations, your technology is basically your defense. It doesn't win you any games, it protects you. And the thing is that once that has been set up, that is run, you play, your ball gets lesser in your defense, but you're playing in the forward up front field of the field itself, which is the midfield and the defense. So we need to start transforming ourselves, giving ourselves the confidence that say, hey, HR makes a big difference, is a part of the business, and we start to move ahead. Not that we're going to score goals against the business as a competitor, but basically, working with them, going ahead, and actually basically, winning the game, together with the rest of the world. So if I were to leave three things, HR transformation is not technology transformation, number one. HR needs to reinvent the way that we see ourselves, number two. HR is part of the business, so don't ask for a seat on the table, you already have the seat on the table. So three key takeaways that I will just offer to the audience here.
Awesome, great. Okay, and to wrap up the call, I've got a couple of thought-provoking questions just to bring a bit of levity to the conversation. As a leader, when you're interviewing someone, what's the main thing that you judge somebody on?
But I always like to end an interview with this question: how is this role going to help you in your next role? To me, I'm asking for two things. One, does that person have a little bit of an insight in terms of how he or she wants to progress in a career, the long-term plan?